She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a cellar no one knew existed. What she discovered there would change not only her future, but her entire understanding of the past. If you've ever felt like you're standing on a threshold, with one world ending and another, uncertain one beginning, stick around. This story is for you. And if it resonates, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're all just figuring it out together. The air in my father's garage smelled of rust, old oil, and a loneliness so profound it felt like another layer of dust. It was my 18th birthday, the day the state officially stopped caring what happened to me. The day I inherited the sum total of my father's life. A ramshackle farmhouse on 20 acres of forgotten land, a mountain of debt, and this suffocating silence. He'd been gone for 6 months, a sudden heart attack while mending a fence line, and most days I still expected to hear his heavy boots on the gravel driveway. But the silence just kept stretching, getting thinner and thinner until I thought it might snap. I ran a hand over the scarred surface of his workbench, my fingers tracing the deep gouges in the wood. Each mark was a story I didn't know. My father had been a man of few words and even fewer explanations. He fixed things, tractors, pipes, fences, but he'd never managed to fix the quiet distance between us. I was legally an adult, but I felt like a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes of grief and responsibility. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring, electronic sound in the analog world of the garage. It was Mr. Henderson, the lawyer my father had apparently hired years ago for reasons that were, like everything else, a mystery. "Clara," he said, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "Happy birthday. I know the circumstances are less than ideal." A subtle humor, the kind that acknowledges an absurdity without cracking a smile. I appreciated it. "I'm calling about the estate." As we discussed, the property has significant liens against it. Back taxes, a mortgage that was never fully paid. It totals just over $50,000. I leaned against the workbench, the cold metal of a vice pressing into my hip. $50,000. I had $312 in my checking account. "However," he continued, and I could hear him shuffling papers, "we have received a rather generous offer. A development group, Northwood Holdings, is prepared to offer $350,000 for the entire parcel. Cash. It would settle all the debts and leave you with a substantial amount to start over." Start over. The words echoed in the garage. It was a clean slate, a get-out-of-jail-free card. I could walk away from the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the memories of a man who felt more like a ghost even when he was alive. I could go to college, get an apartment in a city where no one knew my name or the sad, quiet story of my family. It was the smart thing to do. The only logical thing to do. "They need an answer by the end of the week, Clara," Mr. Henderson added, his tone gentle but firm. "It's a very good offer. I doubt you'd see another one like it." I told him I'd think about it, my voice sounding small and distant. After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, the silence rushing back in to fill the space his voice had occupied. Selling felt like a betrayal, but staying felt like drowning. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that felt remotely productive. I decided to clean the garage. It was a form of penance, maybe. A way to touch the things he'd touched, to try and understand him through the archaeology of his workspace. I swept up years of sawdust and metal filings. I organized scattered wrenches and sockets into neat, clinking rows. I threw out dried-up tubes of sealant and cracked oil pans. It was mindless, physical work, and for a few hours, it kept the panic at bay. In the back corner, under a dusty canvas tarp, was his main toolbox. It was a heavy, old-fashioned steel chest, fire engine red, with a patina of grease and scratches that spoke of decades of use. I'd seen him go to it 1,000 times, but he was always guarded about it. "Tools are personal, Sparrow," he'd say, using the nickname he'd given me when I was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm, a name he'd stopped using years ago. I lifted the heavy lid. The top tray was filled with the familiar tools of his trade, hammers, screwdrivers, pliers. But I knew there was a deeper compartment. I lifted the tray out, my muscles straining. Underneath, nestled in a bed of oil-stained rags, was not another layer of tools. It was just one thing. A key. It was nothing like a modern key. It was heavy, made of dark, pitted iron, with a complex, almost floral-patterned head and a long, thick shaft. It looked ancient, like something you'd find in a sunken treasure chest or the door of a forgotten castle. It felt cold and significant in my palm. I had lived in this house my entire life. I knew every door, every lock, every squeaking floorboard. I had never seen a lock that this key could possibly fit. It was another one of his secrets, another question mark in a life filled with them. And as I stood there, holding that impossible key, a flicker of something other than grief or fear sparked inside me. It was curiosity, a stubborn refusal to walk away until I had at least one answer. The developer's offer could wait. First, I had a mystery to solve. The search became an obsession, a methodical quest that consumed the next 2 days. I started with the obvious: the front door, the back door, the side door to the mudroom. The key was too large, its shape all wrong for the simple pin tumbler locks. I moved outside. The big sliding door of the barn had a heavy-duty padlock, but the keyway was a straight, narrow slit. The key wouldn't even begin to fit. The shed where he kept the mower and the gardening tools had a simple brass lock, tarnished green with age, but it was just as incompatible. I felt a growing sense of frustration, a familiar feeling from my life with him. He was always presenting me with puzzles that had no solutions, with silences that had no explanations. This key felt like his final, cruelest trick, a promise of a secret with no way to unlock it. I went back inside, my shoulders slumped in defeat. I checked every interior door, even the closet under the stairs and the rickety door to the attic. Nothing. I tried the old roll-top desk in the living room, the one piece of furniture he'd forbidden me to touch. The lock was tiny, delicate. The rusted key looked monstrous next to it. I sat at the kitchen table, turning the key over and over in my hands. It was a key to nowhere. A piece of junk he'd kept for some sentimental reason he'd never shared. Maybe it was from his own father's house, a place he never spoke of. Maybe it was just something he'd found and liked the feel of. The thought was deflating. The flicker of curiosity sputtered, threatening to die out and leave me back in the cold dark of my grief. I decided to make a cup of tea, the universal remedy for disappointment. The pantry was a small, windowless room off the kitchen, with floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with canned goods, bags of flour, and jars of preserves my mother had put up the year before she died. The floor was covered in a sheet of faded, cracked linoleum, a pattern of cheerful yellow flowers now mostly worn away to a dingy gray. As I reached for a box of tea on the top shelf, my foot caught on a raised edge of the linoleum I'd never noticed before. I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe. Annoyed, I looked down. A corner of the linoleum had peeled up, creating a lip. I knelt, meaning to press it back down, but my fingers felt a hard edge beneath it. Not the smooth planking of the subfloor, a distinct line. My heart started to beat a little faster. Using my fingernails, I pried at the edge of the vinyl sheet. It was brittle and came away in stiff, cracking pieces, revealing the dark wood underneath. And there it was, a faint but unmistakable outline of a rectangle, about 3 feet by 2. A trap door. It was flush with the rest of the floorboards, its seams filled with the dust of ages. If you weren't looking for it, you would never see it. In the center of the trapdoor was a small, flush-mounted ring pull, and beside it, a keyhole. It wasn't a modern lock. It was a dark, circular opening, rimmed with iron, exactly the right size and shape for the strange key I held in my pocket. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for the key, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to guide it into the lock. It slid in with a smooth, decisive click, a perfect fit. It turned with a groan of protest from old, unoiled metal, and I heard a heavy clunk from beneath the floor. Using the ring, I pulled. The door was heavy, solid oak, and it lifted with a rush of cold, musty air that smelled of damp earth, stone, and something else. Something clean, like old paper. A steep, narrow set of wooden steps led down into darkness. I flicked a switch just inside the pantry door that I'd always assumed was a defunct relic from old wiring. It wasn't. A single, bare bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, casting a weak, yellow glow. I stood at the top, peering down into the hidden space, the key still clutched in my hand. My father, the man of secrets. It turned out his biggest one had been right under my feet all along. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and started down the stairs. The steps creaked under my weight, each sound magnified in the subterranean quiet. The air grew colder as I descended, and the smell of damp earth intensified. When my feet touched the concrete floor, I paused, letting my eyes adjust. This was no root cellar. There were no dusty jars of preserves, no sacks of potatoes, no cobwebs hanging in thick gray ropes. It was a room, a small, meticulously organized workspace. The walls were stone, but they were dry. Along one wall were simple wooden shelves filled not with tools, but with ledgers and binders, neatly labeled by year. In the center of the room stood a heavy wooden desk and a simple straight-backed chair. A gooseneck lamp was clamped to the desk's edge. It was clean, as if it had been used recently. The only sign of disuse was a fine layer of dust coating every surface. It was a secret office, a command center hidden from the world. My father, who barely kept track of the mail, had maintained this hidden, ordered world. The contradiction was staggering. My eyes were drawn to the object sitting squarely in the middle of the floor. A large, dark green metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was closed, but not locked. I knelt before it, my heart thudding against my ribs. What would I find? More secrets? More debt? Something that would make everything even worse? My hands trembled as I lifted the 2 latches on the front. They sprang open with a sharp, metallic snap. I took another breath and lifted the heavy lid. I think I expected ledgers full of numbers I wouldn't understand, or maybe old, sentimental junk. I was wrong. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. $100 bills, wrapped in simple paper bands. There must have been thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. It was neatly arranged on one side of the trunk. The sight of it was so shocking, so utterly out of place in the context of our life of constant, grinding scarcity, that I couldn't process it for a moment. We'd had the electricity turned off twice. I'd worn shoes with holes in the soles. And this was here, all along. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, washed over me. But it was quickly replaced by confusion as I looked at the other half of the trunk. It was filled with letters, dozens of them bundled together with twine. And on top of the first bundle was a single, thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper. In my father's familiar, blocky handwriting, it said, "For my sparrow, on your 18th birthday." My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was cool and smooth. He had known he might not be there. He had prepared this. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, leaned my back against the footlocker, and broke the seal. The letter inside was several pages long, filled with the same careful, deliberate script. I began to read. "My dearest sparrow," it began, and the sight of that old nickname made my eyes burn. "If you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and you found your way down here. I hope you found the key without too much trouble. I always knew you were clever. There's so much I have to tell you, and I am so sorry, so deeply sorry, that I couldn't tell you in person. Fear, I suppose, is the simplest answer. Fear and shame. The man you knew as your father, the quiet, broken-down farmer, is not the whole story. It's not even the most important part. I had to stop and take a breath. My vision was blurry. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept reading. Before you were born, before I met your mother, I lived a different life. I grew up in the city and I fell in with the wrong people. Not cartoon villains, just hard men who saw the world as a thing to be taken. I was a driver for them. I was good at it. I was fast, I was smart, and I kept my mouth shut. For a while, it was good. The money was good. But there's a price for that kind of life, and eventually, the bill comes due. One night, a job went wrong. Terribly wrong. People got hurt. I wasn't responsible for that part. But in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of the men I worked for, I was there. I was involved. I knew I had to get out. The leader of the crew, a man named Gallo, he didn't let people just walk away. To leave, I had to buy my way out. I had to give him everything I had, and then I had to take on a debt, a marker. $100,000. It wasn't a bank loan, Clara. It was the kind of debt that follows you forever. He let me go, but he told me he'd always know where I was, and that one day he might come to collect. I ran. I changed my name. I met your mother. She was like a sunrise after a long, dark night. She knew I had a past, but she didn't know the details. I was too ashamed, too scared to tell her. We bought this place because it was remote, forgotten. Nobody would look for me here. I thought I could build a new life, a safe life for you. For years, it worked. But Gallo never forgot. His people found me. They didn't want to hurt us. They just wanted the money. So I started paying, a little at a time, in cash, through an intermediary. Every spare dollar I ever made went to that debt. The reason the farm never succeeded, the reason we never had anything, the reason the mortgage was never paid off, it was all because I was paying for my past. I was paying to keep you safe. The silence, the distance you must have felt from me, it wasn't because I didn't love you, Sparrow. My God, I loved you more than my own life. It was because I was terrified, every single day, that my world would come crashing down on yours. I couldn't be the father you deserved because I was too busy being your protector. It was the only thing I knew how to do. I dropped the pages into my lap. The cold of the concrete floor seemed to seep into my bones. My whole life, my entire perception of my father, was a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to protect me. The gruff, emotionally unavailable man who couldn't seem to make a success of anything was a phantom. The real man was here, in these words. A man trapped by his past, living a life of quiet, desperate sacrifice. The anger I'd felt just moments before was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching grief that was so much deeper than what I had felt before. I wasn't just mourning his death. I was mourning the life we could have had, the man I had never been allowed to know. I looked at the stacks of cash. It wasn't a hoard, it was a weapon, a final payment. The last paragraph of the letter confirmed it. The money in this trunk is the last of it. $50,000. It's the final payment to Gallo. And there's more, enough to settle the official debts on the house and give you a small cushion. The instructions for how to handle it are in the next envelope. Be careful, Clara. The world is more complicated than it looks from this farm. That developer, Northwood Holdings. That name sounds familiar. Be very, very careful who you trust. I sat there in the silent, cold cellar for what felt like hours, the letter in my hands, the truth of it settling over me like a shroud. The world outside, with its simple, logical choice, sell the farm, take the money, start over, suddenly seemed like a minefield. Mr. Henderson's voice echoed in my head. A very good offer. Was it? Or was it something else? Was Northwood Holdings just a company that wanted land, or was it a new face for an old threat? My father's warning hung in the air. This wasn't just about a property anymore. This was about my father's legacy, about the fight he had waged in secret for my entire life. To sell now felt like spitting on his grave, like invalidating every sacrifice he had made. But to stay? To stay meant stepping into his world, a world of dangerous men and hidden debts. I was 18 years old. I was alone. What was I supposed to do? I felt a tremor of fear run through me, so profound it made my teeth chatter. For the first time, I was truly, completely on my own, and the path forward was shrouded in a fog of secrets and lies. It's a strange thing to have your entire reality reshaped in the space of an afternoon. The house I was in was the same. The dust motes dancing in the slivers of light through the grimy windows were the same. But I saw it all differently now. The peeling paint wasn't neglect, it was a symptom of a hidden war. The creaking floors weren't just old, they were the sound of a secret being kept. My father's life, which I had always seen as a straight line of quiet disappointment, was now a complex, tangled knot of love and fear. And I was standing in the middle of it. You know, if you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where you find out a truth that changes everything you thought you knew about someone you love, then you know the feeling. It's like the ground beneath your feet just disappears. If you do know what I'm talking about, maybe share a little about it in the comments. Not the secrets themselves, of course, but just that feeling. It helps to know you're not the only one whose world has been turned upside down. I spent the night in the cellar. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I switched on the gooseneck lamp on the desk, and its focused pool of light created a small island of warmth in the cool darkness. I opened the next envelope, as instructed. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of names and numbers and another, shorter letter. Sparrow, it read. This is the hard part. The $50,000 for Gallo needs to get to him. The man who used to handle it for me, a pawn shop owner named Silas, passed away last year. I haven't been able to make a payment since. That's likely why they're getting impatient. This Northwood company showing up right after he died is no coincidence. I'm almost certain Gallo is behind it. He's trying to collect his debt by taking the land. Do not sell to them. They will not give you what it's worth. The letter went on to detail something that made my blood run cold. My father had been a meticulous researcher. He'd spent years learning about geology and water tables. They're not after the land, Clara, he wrote. They're after what's under it. There's a massive, clean water aquifer directly beneath this property, one of the largest untapped sources in the state. In a few years, as droughts get worse, the water rights to that aquifer will be worth millions. 10, maybe 20 times what they're offering you. They're trying to steal it from you. The official debts on the house are your only weakness. They're hoping to force you out before you realize what you're sitting on. It all clicked into place. The generous offer. The time pressure. It was a classic squeeze play. They saw a grieving, inexperienced 18-year-old, and they thought I would be an easy mark. They thought I'd take the quick cash and run, ignorant of the treasure I was leaving behind. A new feeling began to bubble up through the grief and fear. Anger. A cold, hard fury. They had underestimated my father, and now they were underestimating me. The rest of the night was a blur of reading. I went through the other bundles of letters. They weren't from anyone. They were from him to me. Years of them. He'd written to me almost every week, pouring out all the things he couldn't say to my face. He wrote about his past, his regrets, his love for my mother. He wrote about how proud he was of me, about my first steps, my first day of school, the time I won a prize for a science project. He had seen me. He had been paying attention all along. The letters were his real heart, his true voice, stored away in the dark. I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for the father I'd lost and for the one I'd just found. I cried for his lonely, secret struggle. And when the sun began to cast a pale, gray light through the pantry door at the top of the stairs, I knew what I had to do. The choice was no longer a choice. It was an obligation, a duty to honor the man in these letters, not the silent ghost I thought I knew. I packed up the cash for the house debts into a canvas bag. The $50,000 for Gallo I left in the trunk for now. That was a problem for another day. First, I had to secure my home. I walked out of the cellar and closed the trap door, covering it with the old linoleum rug. The secret was safe again. I went to the kitchen and found my phone. My hands were steady now. I dialed Mr. Henderson's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional and alert. "Clara, have you given Northwood's offer some thought?" "Yes, I have," I said, my voice clear and even. "I'm rejecting the offer." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Clara," he said slowly, carefully, "are you sure? This is a life-changing amount of money. The debts on the property are substantial. You won't be able to manage them on your own." "I can manage them," I said. "I'd like to schedule an appointment to come to your office this afternoon. I'll be bringing a bank draft to settle the mortgage and the tax liens in full." The silence on the line was even longer this time. I could almost hear the calculations running through his head. An 18-year-old girl with no job and no prospects suddenly has over $50,000. "I see," he said, his voice now laced with a cautious curiosity. "May I ask where this money came from?" "It was part of my father's estate," I said, the words technically true. "He made some provisions I wasn't aware of until now." It was a weak explanation, but it was the only one I had. "Very well," he said, his professional mask slipping back into place. "I'll have the paperwork ready. 2 o'clock?" "2 o'clock is perfect," I said, and ended the call. I stood in the kitchen, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds and streaming through the window. The house felt different again. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a fortress. And I was not going to let them take it. Walking into a bank with over $50,000 in cash in a duffel bag is an experience I don't recommend. Every eye feels like it's on you. Every security guard looks like they're about to tackle you. I followed my father's written instructions to the letter. Go to a large branch in the next town over, not our small local one. Ask for the branch manager. Explain that it's inheritance from a reclusive relative who didn't trust banks. It was a story that was just plausible enough to work. The manager, a woman with kind eyes and a sharp suit, was professional and discreet. There was paperwork, of course, endless forms to fill out, questions about the source of the funds. I stuck to my story, my heart pounding the entire time. But in the end, the money was deposited, and I walked out with a certified bank draft for the full amount of the estate's debts. The weight of that slip of paper in my pocket was immense. It was freedom. It was ownership. My meeting with Mr. Henderson was brief and formal. He examined the bank draft, his eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. He asked no more questions, for which I was grateful. He was a lawyer, and his client's instructions were clear. He made the calls, and by the time I left his office an hour later, the liens were settled. The house, the land, the aquifer beneath it, it was all mine. Free and clear. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool autumn air whip through the cab of my father's old pickup truck. I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The first battle was won, but I knew the war was just beginning. Sure enough, a week later, a new letter arrived. It was from Northwood Holdings. The polite, formal tone was gone. This one was from their legal department. They offered $400,000, and they included a subtle warning about an old, disputed survey of the property line along the creek. It was a clear threat, a signal that they weren't going to give up easily. They were going to try to bully me. I threw the letter in the wood stove. I wasn't the scared little girl they thought I was. I was my father's daughter, and this was my home. Instead of being intimidated, I got to work. I started with the house. I spent a week just cleaning, scrubbing away the years of dust and neglect. I washed every window until it sparkled, letting the light pour in. I repaired the broken step on the porch, the one my father had always meant to get to. I bought cans of paint and gave the peeling exterior a fresh coat of clean, bright white. Each hammer blow, each brush stroke was a declaration. This is mine. I am here to stay. I moved on to the land. I cleared the overgrown brush from around the house. I tilled a small patch of earth for a vegetable garden, just as my mother had done years ago. I felt a connection to the soil, to the place that I had never felt before. It was becoming a part of me. One afternoon, while buying supplies at the local hardware store, the owner, an old man named George with hands as gnarled as oak roots, stopped me. "You're Tom's girl, aren't you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. I nodded. "Heard you were fixing the place up. That's good to see." He paused, leaning on the counter. "Your dad was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself. But he'd help anyone who asked. Pulled my truck out of a ditch in that big snowstorm a few years back. Didn't ask for a dime. Just said, 'Neighbors help neighbors.' This town could use more folks like him." His words were a small gift, another piece of the puzzle of my father that I was slowly assembling. He wasn't just a protector in secret. He was a quiet, decent man in the open, too. I drove home that day with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just defending a piece of property. I was defending a legacy. The problem of Gallo and the $50,000 still loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. I didn't have a solution for that yet, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had solid ground under my feet, and I was ready for whatever came next. Months passed. Autumn gave way to the deep cold of winter. The first snow fell, blanketing the fields in a pristine layer of white. The house was warm, the wood stove crackling merrily. The threatening letters from Northwood had stopped, for now. I knew they were just regrouping, planning their next move. But the quiet gave me time to think, to reflect on the seismic shift that had occurred in my life. I spent many evenings down in the cellar, not out of fear, but out of a need to be close to him. I would sit at his desk, reading and rereading his letters, absorbing the story of his life. I came to understand that the farm wasn't a prison he'd been trapped in. It was a sanctuary he had built. Every sagging fence post, every leaky pipe he'd fixed, was an act of love. He wasn't hiding from the world in shame. He was standing guard over mine. I thought about the concept of inheritance. Before, I'd thought of it as money, property, the things you get when someone dies. But I realized now that I had it all wrong. The $350,000 from Northwood would have been an inheritance, yes, but it would have been a hollow one. It would have bought me a new life, but it would have cost me my past, my identity. The true inheritance my father left me wasn't the money in the trunk or the land itself. It was the story. It was the truth. He gave me a new way to see him, a new way to understand my own life. He gave me the gift of his struggle, and in doing so, he gave me my own strength. He had spent his life trying to protect me from his past, but in the end, It was only by facing that past that I could claim my future. The house was no longer just a collection of wood and nails. It was a living monument to a father's love. It was a home, forged in secret and reclaimed in truth. And I had no intention of ever leaving. The problem of Gallo remained. The $50,000 sat in the trunk, a silent, heavy weight. My father's letters offered no easy solution. The intermediary was gone. I had no way to contact these people without putting myself in incredible danger. For weeks, I was paralyzed by indecision. Then, one evening, while reading a passage where my father wrote about the importance of facing things head-on, an idea began to form. It was risky, it was terrifying, but it felt right. I went back to Mr. Henderson. I told him a modified version of the truth. I told him my father had an old, private business debt with a party that was now making aggressive inquiries through a third party, Northwood Holdings. I told him I wanted to settle the debt, but I needed to do it legally, through him, to create a firewall of protection for myself. He listened patiently, his face unreadable. I handed him an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a letter I had carefully drafted. The letter was addressed to the CEO of Northwood Holdings. It stated my intention to settle the outstanding private debt of my father, Thomas Miller, to their associate, Mr. Gallo. It proposed that in exchange for this payment, all claims against my property, including any spurious property line disputes, be dropped permanently. It was a gamble. It was an open admission that I knew who they were and what they were doing. Mr. Henderson read the letter, his expression unchanging. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "This is highly irregular, Clara, and potentially dangerous." "I know," I said, "but my father didn't run from his responsibilities, and I won't either. I just want to do it on my own terms." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he gave a small, slow nod. "I will act as your legal representative in this matter. I will draft a formal settlement agreement. There will be no direct contact between you and these individuals. Everything will go through this office. It's the only way to ensure your safety." A wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't entirely alone in this. The process took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of agonizing silence where every knock on the door, every car that drove slowly down my road, sent a jolt of fear through me. Then, one morning, Mr. Henderson called. "It's done," he said, his voice flat, but I could detect a note of satisfaction. "They've accepted the terms. The funds have been transferred. You will receive a legally binding agreement signed by their representatives stating that all debts are settled and they relinquish any and all claims to your property." "They're walking away, Clara." I hung up the phone and slid down to the floor, my legs suddenly weak. It was over. The debt that had shadowed my father's entire adult life, the threat that had kept him a prisoner on his own land, was gone. I had done it. I had finished his fight. That evening, I walked out to the fence line at the edge of the property, the place where he had died. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold. The air was cold and still. I looked out at the land, my land, and I felt him there with me. Not as a ghost, but as a presence, a strength inside me. He had given me a home, and now I had truly made it my own. The story wasn't over, not really. It was just beginning. I had a future to build, a life to live. But it would be a life built on a foundation of truth, a foundation he had laid for me in the dark, silent earth beneath my feet. So that's my story. It's a story about how the things we inherit aren't always what they seem, and how the greatest treasures are often buried under a lifetime of sacrifice. It taught me that home isn't just a place you live, it's a story you belong to. And sometimes, to find your future, you have to be willing to descend into the cellars of the past. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This channel is a place for stories like this, stories about finding strength in unexpected places, and making sense of the complicated legacies we're all a part of. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing and joining our community. And I really want to hear from you. What does the word home mean to you? What does it mean to truly inherit something from the people who came before you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and I promise I read every single one. Thank you for being here.